Hello, everybody. This episode, I'm going to get back to my roots a bit, talking about narcissism and narcissistic abuse and, all the good stuff about empathy and non-empathy. And I have an amazing guest on today. It was an incredible conversation. But before we get into that, just want to remind you, if you're on YouTube, please subscribe, give me a like. On podcast platforms, please give me a good rating. And if you'd like to join my Patreon, where I talk about a bunch of cool stuff, go to patreon.com/Mark Vicente. And thank you to my Patreon subscribers for all your support. So, this episode, I have Dr. Jaime Zuckerman. Let me read you a little blurb about her. Dr. Jaime Zuckerman is a licensed clinical psychologist and national expert in narcissistic abuse. She's a highly sought-after relationship coach for those experiencing narcissistic abuse, as well as the sole owner and founder of the Z Group, a private therapy practice specializing in anxiety, depression, and complex relationship dynamics. Dr. Z is the author of 2 interactive workbooks. Her first workbook, titled Find Your Calm, a workbook to manage anxiety, garnered great success, prompting her to pen a second book titled Find Good Habits, a workbook for daily growth. She's an accomplished and active media contributor, as well as an influential social media personality in the mental health space. More recently, Dr. Z launched her newest podcast, Next Up Narcissism, where she has the tough conversations and tackles the hard questions about narcissistic abuse, relationships, and mental health. I trust you will enjoy this conversation. I think what I want to start with is, and I'm always interested when I talk to people, especially clinicians, to figure out why this field, why psychology, why anxiety, depression, relationship dynamics, narcissistic abuse, what's the backstory as to why this insane thing of all things?
Yeah, isn't it? It is.
I think it is.
I
but thank goodness for people like you.
Yeah, I always not forget, but I think because I'm so used to doing it and talking it all the time that I honestly forget how absolutely batshit crazy it is.
Yes, it totally is. And it's dark. It's dark,
so
right?
Dark. I don't think people realize how it's evil. It's evil. I don't think people realize it's evil. It's not just toxic. It's evil.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So why?
So why psychology in general?
Yeah, why psychology, and then specifically why your interest in, narcissism and narcissistic abuse?
Yeah. So psychology in general, I oddly always wanted to be a veterinarian.
Really?
Yes. Because I love animals, but I love animal behavior. I've always been fascinated by it. And when I think it was a combination of when I realized how hard it is to go that route. But then I started taking psychology classes in high school, and I realized that you kind of do the same thing behavior-wise, but with humans. And I just found that fascinating. So I originally wanted to go into neuropsychology because I'm fascinated with the actual brain and how the brain works. And I'm still just fascinated by it. So I'm kind of a nerd in that respect. But I'm just fascinated by it. And then when I went to college, I was, kind of opened up to so many more psychology avenues. And I just absolutely fell in love with personality, just personality psychology, and how behaviorism can explain only so much of it. I just found it fascinating. So I kind of went that route. And then I worked in advertising after college because I was interested in consumer-driven behavior. So I was very fascinated with personality and behavior and all of that. And then I ended up going back to grad school to get my doctorate after that, and went the route of clinical psych because I was just, again, fascinated with human behavior and all of that, and depression and anxiety naturally are part of that. But I think so what's interesting, and I think people in my cohort, my generation who were in grad school at the time, I think I speak on behalf of many clinicians with this, not just my program. We were really not given anything about narcissistic personality disorder. All we were told about it was that it's a cluster B personality disorder, but I could tell you all day long how to treat borderline personality disorder. That we talked about constantly. Never once did we talk about NPD in a clinical setting. The only thing we were told about it, it's grandiose, and it really gave you this almost this like Hollywoodized version of NPD. Nothing about coercive control, covert, nothing about that underlying, we talk about evilness, essentially. None of it. None of it. And so while, borderline personality disorder and NPD can overlap somewhat, they're actually really inherently different. And so I really didn't have as much information about it as I would have liked to at all. And so when I went into private practice, I ended up seeing more women than men in my practice initially. And it was for anxiety and depression. But I can honestly tell you that people came in always with relationship issues, right? Whether it stemmed from the dynamics of the depression, anxiety in the relationship, or it was their relationship difficulties then resulted in depression and anxiety. But one of the things that I really started to notice was that every so often I would have somebody come in and talk about their spouse or talk about their parent in the literal same playbook, behavior-wise. And I would, treat it no differently than I do now. But I was sitting there, and this was many, many, many years ago, and, thinking, this is narcissistic personality disorder, right? And because we were trained not to look at it in the way that it was being exposed to me. And it just kind of grew from there, because I realized that it was such an I don't want to say research, because it's but it's such an I don't know. There's no information on it for the masses. At least at the time there wasn't. There was no information. Nobody talked about it because nobody understood what the hell they were dealing with. There were no words to put to it. There was no patterns to say, listen, this is what this is, and this is what's going to happen next. I mean, sometimes my patients will think that I'm like this mind reader, fortune teller, because I'll say, okay, this is what's going to happen next. And like, how did you know? And I'm like, well, it's not anything mystical. It's such a distinct playbook. And I think what drew me to that was, again, because of the behaviorism aspect of it, because it's so specific and so, like almost like a microchip has been implanted in these people, right? It's so subtle, but yet so unique and so similar at the same time, that I just gravitated towards it, because it's my belief that when you have something that's so predictable in nature, I actually find that it's easier to help treat somebody than when it's chaotic. Because even though it seems chaotic, there's such a distinct way to go about helping people with it. And I just found that when somebody finally understands the playbook, you see this light bulb go off. You could actually see it. And the empowerment that the person starts to feel is probably one of the most, at least for a clinician, one of the most rewarding things, because now I know they're going to be okay, right? And you can't go backwards. And it's one of the few things when I work with people where depression, you relapse, anxiety, you relapse. This, you're always going to be working on it, but it's never going to be the same as it was before.
That is so interesting that you never go back, because I think once you see the playbook, it's true.
You can't unsee it.
And the other thing that's interesting is people have said to me, they've had the recognition that, oh my God, there's a playbook, there's a pattern. And they say things like, it's like they go to the same school, like they learn the same thing. And I'm fascinated. Like, is it that the brain is the same way? Like, what is it that it's so predictable?
So, I mean, there's different schools of thought on this, right? There's research that says that it's brain abnormalities. There's research that says, it's hardwired from birth. I tend to take more of a lot of it is this learned pattern of behavior that you adopt because you need it to survive through whatever, abusive, usually traumatic, abusive upbringing that you've been through. And when I say abusive, I don't necessarily mean, physical. It a lot of times people think, well, this person, they could do no wrong. They were viewed as the golden child, but that's also problematic. So, when I say kind of abusive, I'm taking that all into consideration, but, it's very much learned patterns. And, do I think that over time, as you engage in certain behaviors, your brain becomes kind of wired in that way? Absolutely. It's like, it's like skiing. It's like if you go down the same slope, you get the tracks in the snow deeper and deeper and deeper. Those pathways are set up over time. But I tend to take more of a stance that it's patterns of behavior that are learned.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. What are because we know this, and I think you and I discussed this before. There's so much in the public now about he's a narcissist, she's a narcissist, that everything's narcissism. So what are the most common misconceptions about narcissism and NPD that you're noticing?
I love this question.
Yeah.
This is when I get to yell at everyone who yells at me on Instagram. So I'm assuming I can curse on here.
You can curse as much as you want.
So being a narcissist, having narcissistic personality disorder, I think one of the issues that happened was that instead of saying this person has NPD, people say they're a narcissist. And I think that's kind of where us being lazy with our vocabulary, I think that got us into a little bit of trouble right there, right, because it became almost like a descriptor rather than a diagnosis. And anytime that happens, you run the risk of it starting to trend, especially on social media. Like, I'm so OCD. No, you're not, because you wouldn't be smiling about it, because it's debilitating. It's not being clean and neat. It's debilitating. You get no joy and pleasure from making your bed 9 million times, right? It's like, I'm so ADHD. You're no, it's when it's used in those contexts. So if someone says like, "Oh, they're such a narcissist," it makes my skin crawl, because it misses what it really is. And so it ends up being watered down. And so I think, the misconceptions and the myths of NPD are that, one, it's somebody who is a serious asshole. And what I always say is all narcissists are assholes, but not all assholes are narcissists, right? It's like not everybody who, so if you take substance abuse, for example, somebody who has a drinking problem or a drug problem or a gambling problem, anything that's an addictive quality, when they're in that mode, their personality style changes and shifts. They become something different when they're intoxicated or when they're not sober. When you remove that and they're sober and you take that out and then they come back to who they are, they don't have a personality disorder, right? So I think there's a lot of things that people don't necessarily understand. Another myth is that, people with narcissistic, or people who are narcissists, are like maybe horrible or assholes to somebody. They miss the idea that this is the way this person is to everybody in their world. Everybody in their world is almost considered one unit. It's them and the world. There's no individuality. And so they may come off as very charming and nice at work because it makes them look good. But that doesn't mean that they're nice to people at work and they're not behind closed doors. They're putting on they are pretending to be nice. So it's part of that diagnosis in general. So I think people also forget that. The last thing I think is that people have this idea that it takes two. And listen, there's plenty of relationships, marriages, friendships. I leave we can talk about this later if you want. I leave the parent-child relationship separate on this one a little bit, because I put that in a different category. But there's always going to be people who don't get along when they are together, right? I may work with one person but that person didn't work with somebody else and they were horrible together and it was toxic and nasty and it was a nasty divorce. But then when I'm with them, we're good because we just fit better. That doesn't mean that person's a narcissist, because if they were, it would be the same crap with me all over again. So I think people think that there's this, it takes two to tango type thing. And with narcissistic personality disorder, that is not true. There's nothing that you're doing that is creating this toxic dynamic. Nothing.
Right. It's totally out of the blue. So just to talk about what's going on with them internally, let's take the extreme of sort of not just traits, but the narcissism, NPD, malignant narcissism. What is your experience of what you think is going on inside of them?
So I think that there's sometimes two paths that it can take. I think in one sense there's kind of this compensatory narcissism where the person is kind of making up for the absolute void and worthlessness and nothingness that they feel or that they felt before that they swore they would never feel again. And so they construct this character or this personality structure to compensate for that, or to fill that, to kind of get rid of it. And we know with psychology that anytime, any effort to avoid being uncomfortable just creates more of what you don't want. And so it's kind of this double-edged sword. But I think that that's one way. Then I truly believe that, and not just believe, but then I think that there's another avenue where there is no necessarily void. It's this is who they are. They do believe that truly, and there's nothing that's vacant for them, that they are this person, and there's how dare you disrespect me, and the rage comes out, all of that. So I think I do believe that there's two paths. I'm not sure that it matters, I guess is what I'm saying, because either way the behaviors look identical and it's the same thing in a sense. But I do think at the end of the day, I think most narcissists do internally, deep down somewhere, do feel that they are an absolute shell void. There's a nothingness to them.
That's that's interesting though that you say for some it may not be quite the same, because I've been assuming that there's this void in all of them. I might be wrong. Now, the stuff we're talking about, this isn't stuff that you learned when you began studying psychology.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of avoidance and this concept of experiential avoidance, whereas avoiding your internal discomfort and doing things like that. Yes. And I think you can apply that to any disorder. But no, not to this extent at all. Not even close.
So one thing I see people struggling with is they're trying to make sense of the narcissist all the time, their behaviors. And one of the things they see is the person trying to control everything, and they're not sure why, because they don't try to control everything necessarily. And it seems exhausting to try to control everything. What do you think's going on with this pathological need to control everything? What is that?
I mean, we know that NPD is all about control, power, manipulation, doing whatever it is you need to do to get what you want. So I think the control aspect comes from their absolute dead set need on getting what they want, right? And if they want power, they're going to do whatever they need to do to get it. If they want total access to you and your thoughts and your emotions, they're going to do whatever they need to get it. And really, if you think about it, the only avenue to do that is to control everything about the person. No, what I wear, what I eat, what I look like, what I do for a living, who I talk to. I mean, that's the only way to get total power over somebody. But we think it's exhausting because it's like that. I mean, I can't even, I half the time I don't even know what day it is. If I don't look at my calendar, I'll miss calls. I can't fathom that degree of control. But here's what I do think happens though. If you think about when somebody's in a relationship with somebody who is a true narcissist, who has narcissistic personality disorder, the path they take to gain all that control over you is gradual, right? But they start planning it way ahead of time, from the first time even before they probably meet you. They're researching you, they're looking up, they're knowing what you love, so they can say, oh, I've never done that. I would love to do that. Tell me more about it. That's so crazy you do that. I've always wanted to do that, right? But that once they suck you in, right? And they there's my clinical word for the day. Once they suck you in and they have you, because of the other person's need to keep the peace, and the other person's need to not ruffle feathers and just do what they want because it's so much easier. In a weird way, some of that work's done now on their part. They don't need to actively do things to control all of you anymore, because you already know 12 o'clock, you better answer that phone, or when you come home, you better hand your phone over because they're going to go through it, or how to dress when you, like, it's kind of done. And so then what they do is they kind of sit back and watch this show that they've created, that they're the stars in. And so it's exhausting, but I also think there's a period where it's like there's you're like their final product in a way, which sounds so creepy just saying that.
It does sound creepy, but I'm also wondering, and I've only just suddenly thought about this. I thought to myself, is it possible that part of the control, that there might be some kind of dopamine reward for getting the control?
Yes. This is where my brain stuff comes in that I love talking about. So yes, absolutely. Because it's not just they need to be in control because, they have this void. They're 100 absolutely is that. But they very much get something chemically, dopamine hit, all that, when you do what they want, when they have control over you. This is why people who treat the other person, the non-narcissist, one of the biggest things we'll tell them is to control and almost you have to become like an artist and in your crafting of responses. And the reason why is because underneath it all, the main goal of a response to a narcissist is one of neutrality. And the reason why that's so important is because then they don't get that dopamine hit. They get nothing, which chemically is why eventually they'll go to somebody else, because they need that. They need that hit. If they're not getting it from you, then there's no point to you anymore.
That's interesting. So gray rocking is actually very, very clever because it modulates their chemistry.
Absolutely. So when people say you can't control other people's behavior, you can't. But what you can do is shift yours ever so slightly to kind of throw the other person off balance. And that's exactly what that does. And then Tina Swithin has the yellow rock, which is also super important too, because sometimes gray rock, depending on your situation, you have kids, sometimes it doesn't always apply. So I love her idea of that, because then it kind of, again, still keeps it within your control, but it allows you to shift it as you need, as long as it's still within that context of you're really giving them neutrality. I mean, half of my job is helping people craft text messages to other people and literally helping them write it.
Wow. So just going to people that are victims of this kind of abuse, I find that they're always evaluating their abuser, their narcissist, from their perspective emotionally, and I feel like they can't imagine somebody could get a thrill or joy out of hurting people.
It's so upsetting.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, like, are a lot of people stuck in that place?
Yes. And I think there's two my clinical experience. This is just purely anecdotal. This is purely what I say. There's two very traumatic points in therapy that occur. The first is when the person realizes, holy shit, my entire relationship has been a lie. And literally their foundation, their faux foundation, the illusion of the foundation they had, is literally ripped out from under them, and their world is, it collapses. There's that. It's extremely traumatic for people, because now, who do I trust? What just happened? I don't even know who I am anymore. And it's very jarring. And then I think the second traumatic thing that happens is when they realize that there's that blueprint and that it exists regardless if they're in it or not. And that, I get this all the time. Wait, they know what they're doing? Wait a minute. Wait. They did this on they used my child to do this, and this. They purposely wanted to see me upset, and it's this like foreign concept, because we don't operate like that. And so to get joy, or not even joy, but just to base your day-to-day functioning on the degree to which you can manipulate and control other people, is so unbelievably evil and disturbing. And I think that's the piece that a lot of people miss about narcissism, because it's not readily available to see, is that this is a very calculated, deliberate, yeah, it may be habitual because they've been doing it for so long, but at the end of the day, if you bring it to their attention, they don't care that they're doing this. It's something that they need and that they want. It's extremely disturbing for people. I mean, I have people, even my closest friend, she lets me talk about this. She is still going through this, and still I just got a text message from her this morning. I can't believe that he did this, this, and this. Like, she said, I still can't believe this is done on purpose. And she's been out of this relationship for years. And she's still, so it just goes against the human condition. It goes against the grain. And I think that's also why, back to kids and their parents, I think that's also why that is so unbelievably, it's just unimaginable. As a parent myself, I can't fathom that. But it happens. And so I think it's very traumatic for people. And yes, they absolutely remain stuck in it. It may not prevent them from moving forward, but I would be very naive to say that they don't go back to it and say, like, that was on purpose. Like, that was intentional.
Yeah. And, I don't want to shit on psychology, but a number of psychologists I've spoken to talk about how it's not encouraged to speak the way we're speaking right now.
Oh, people hate me for this.
Yeah, to ascribe intent and to talk about words like evil.
As I always say, it's not a clinical word. I get that. And I understand that as a clinician, I don't even want to say the reason why I describe it, it's almost like I'm just describing the behaviors. If it sounds that bad, it's because it is that bad. And I think the clinicians that have a hard time with that are probably the ones that don't specialize in it. And I'll just leave it at that. And I don't fault them for it, because listen, this is the other thing I think, and I think clinicians that specialize in this will agree with me on this. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but for us, like, we went into this field because we want to help people, right? We went into this field because we know that people can live a more, I'm not going to say happier, and people hate me for that too. I'm not saying happier, a more fulfilled, value-driven life. And I think everybody has the right to that. And I, if I can help people do that, then I want to help people do that. So for me to say, and for other clinicians to say, that any diagnosis is unworkable, is evil almost, is really hard for us to say. Yes, it comes out of my mouth easily, but please understand that for me to say that, it takes a lot, because in my eyes, I think we can help everybody. And so it takes a lot for me to say that. So I do genuinely think that the people who are saying it or who think it's wrong, I respect that. But I'm going to lean towards it's probably people that aren't immersed in it on a daily basis.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. What is it about narcissistic abuse that is so insidious, that is so earth-shattering? Because, as you say, people that don't know, have never experienced or don't know what it is, don't understand what it does to people. Like, in your view, what is so earth-shattering about it?
One, because it's something that is from the onset of the relationship. Like, if it's a parent, the day you're born. If it's an intimate relationship, even before you meet. It is a deliberately calculated, purposeful effort to do whatever they need to do to gain control and power over you. You're an object. You're not a person. You don't have separate values and opinions and interests. You are an object that serves a purpose. Truly, you're no different than my mug that I need to drink coffee. If this is my favorite mug, right? It's there. I always have it. It serves its purpose. But if one day this mug breaks, done. I literally have no need for you anymore. And that's why it's so it rocks you to your core, because here you have this person who has, on a moment-to-moment basis, is always thinking about, how can I not make this person angry? How can they give their everything all the time. And one of the things you'll hear oftentimes, especially from women who leave narcissistic men, they will say they have literally given up their lives. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard that. They have given up years of their lives only for this person to just so easily, so like casually discard them. You know, and so it's like if you take that model and you apply it to a normal, I'm going to say normal, that I won't say, to a non-toxic relationship. If one day, out of nowhere, my husband says to me, I'm done, and just walks out, it's so unfathomable. Like, what? Right? No, nothing. No, we're on, you know, I know 3 kids, whatever, just whatever. I'm over it. It sounds ridiculous. So why then is it not ridiculous when we look at it in that context? It's absurd. And I think it's so jarring and so just almost like Twilight Zone, otherworldly. It just doesn't fit into your framework of how the world works. It's almost like, you know, with PTSD, the reason why PTSD is because something happens. It's so unimaginable that it doesn't fit into your schema of how the world works. And because you can't process that information in the schema that you have, it sticks out, right? Like if I go to a restaurant, I have a script of how that's going to work. But if all of a sudden the restaurant, like just, I don't know, the ceiling falls in, that's going to stick in my mind because that's not part of my script. And so my trust in my script for eating at a restaurant is now forever damaged. And so it's kind of the same thing. It's like you have this script of how relationships are supposed to work. And then that happens. And it's so unbelievably just, you know, shattering because that's not what's supposed to happen. And now you're left with, so all of that was for nothing, right? All of that effort, all of that abuse, all of those tears, all of that confusion, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the life I gave up, the career I gave up, right? Like my friend that I use her as my example, she was a brilliant Penn graduate, attorney. You know, she wasn't allowed to work a day in her life. She, you know, she wasn't allowed to wear certain things. She wasn't allowed to do certain things. And just when she finally left after multiple attempts, he's engaged within 2 months. She's just, and not that she wants to be with him, but that idea of, so all of that, like, and posting, this is my soulmate. I've been waiting for this person, as if the last 20 years and kids meant absolutely nothing. And even though it was a horrific relationship, that is such an abnormal thing to happen, you know? So I think that it just rocks people's world. And you have to completely undo your view of relationships, of trust, of yourself. It's not just a bad breakup that you have to get over. It's literally rebuilding your entire sense of self.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, because when you talked about the schema, talked about the map, if you think you are the map, and if most of us think we are the map, it means then that you have no idea who you really are or what reality is.
Nope. No.
Yeah.
No, it's like you watch the Truman Show, right? Or the Matrix, it's that. It's literally finding out that the world you lived in isn't really the world you lived in. It really is that, you know, I like the Truman Show example because when he hits the wall, right, and the boat, and you just can see the absolute fear and just his brain exploding, and that's literally what happens.
Yes. So the complex PTSD, because there's these ongoing echoes from that moment of shock, which certainly I've felt for years. And sometimes I still have, you know, I'll have dreams and I'll be kind of back there and I'll be, what the fuck is going, why am I here again? You know, that to me is so interesting. And my sense is, I was asking somebody the other day about this, like there's the DSM-5 talk about narcissistic abuse, and they said, well, not really. We talk about it in terms of complex PTSD. And I said, why don't we talk about narcissistic abuse? And they said, well, maybe the ICD-11 might talk about it at some point. But it feels to me that this is such a underrepresented.
Oh yeah.
I don't even know how to say it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It is. I think for a couple of reasons. One, back to your and one of your original questions about kind of the misconceptions about NPD. I think one of the ones that hurts the experience of survivors is that technically the percentage of NPD in the general population is tiny. And so I think it doesn't get enough research. It doesn't get enough acknowledgement. Definitely not within grad schools. Maybe it's changing now because, now it's everywhere. So maybe they do. But I'm not sure if they do, because I gave a one-day seminar at a graduate school on NPD because they wanted me to come talk about it because they don't talk about it. I'm like, oh my God. So, yeah. So because of that, I believe that number is hugely underdiagnosed, because for the simple fact that those with NPD do not seek treatment. If they do, if it's court mandated or it's court mandated co-parenting, that's really it. Otherwise, they're not going for therapy unless the therapist falls into their, manipulation and their game, and they can sit there and talk about themselves for an hour, or it's to couples therapy to continue to traumatize their partner. I mean, but they don't go to therapy. They don't acknowledge, oh, I have narcissistic personality disorder, I'm going to call a therapist. No. So they're very misrepresented, but I don't want to say underdiagnosed, underrepresented. So I think it's out there a lot more, but I think one of the reasons why it has not talked about for so long is because it's viewed as, well, it's really tiny in comparison to the other things that are out there.
Yeah. There's another thing I wanted to ask you about, and because I feel like you've seen this as a clinician. So I was at a seminar last year. I was one of the speakers, and somebody was asking a question about narcissism to some of the other clinicians who were there, which I'm not. And they kept on asking questions, and I was thinking to myself, they're asking this question because they want to see if there's hope. And this is the kind of question they would ask. They would say things like, but is the narcissist capable of genuine empathy and genuine connection? Do you see that with people, that they're trying to find some connectivity?
Yeah. And I say this because I do genuinely think that majority of people are good. So I truly believe that it's so hard for us to wrap our brains around the fact that somebody can be so unhealthy, so mentally unwell, yet not have any willingness to seek change, knowing that they are hurting people in front of their faces and still not caring to seek change, again, is unfathomable to us. Because listen, everybody has unhealthy patterns, and I think this is actually a good distinction to make here, that I have had patients who come to me who on the surface seem extremely narcissistic, right? But they still come, and they're very curious, they're very resistant, but they're still coming, and they're interested in what I'm saying. They're hearing the feedback. They may not necessarily be applying it. They may argue with me, whatever the case may be. But they are, on the surface, they may look identical to somebody who, the behaviors look identical, but the underlying function of their behaviors is not one of control, manipulation, and power, deliberate control, manipulation, and power. Their behaviors are maybe seeking control because they're uncomfortable and anxious when they're not in control. And so to reduce their anxiety, they seek out control in other people. And when I say to them, listen, I understand why you're doing what you're doing, but here's the thing. In your effort to gain control, to reduce your own anxiety, you're hurting your relationships. You are hurting your your siblings, right? Or you're hurting your spouse, and they'll say, I don't want to do that. I just can't break these patterns. I don't want to hurt other people. That's the difference. And so, the underlying function of these behaviors are very different. And, so people can come off that way. But as far as, and I think when people say, well, this person changed and, and there's hope to change, I think there is for the people who have patterns of behavior that on the surface look like that, but the underlying function is different because they have empathy and they have a willingness to be uncomfortable in the moment, and they have a willingness to change even though it's hard. I think people that don't have empathy, genuine empathy, I don't care how good of a clinician you are, even with the best clinician for narcissistic personality disorder, even the best clinician in the world, maybe in a session could maybe get a glimmer of change, right? In the session, which is a microcosm of their larger life, right? But to ask that person to then leave your office and not only continue, but maintain that change and then have it grow, that I just haven't seen that. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think people that aren't so far down the spectrum of it, there is more wiggle room to work with, but not the personality disorder. It's a different construct.
I agree with you. I think I'm in the school of, my non-professional opinion, I'm in the school of like, they're not changing, because what you're describing is somebody that is made aware of a consequence of their behavior and they feel remorse.
Yes.
And that you can work with.
Yes. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Versus the person that's just mystified as to what the problem is and why is that person even having a stush about it.
You were in my way.
Yeah.
That's not my fault. You were in my way. I needed to get what I needed to get, right? You were in my way, or, well, if you didn't like it, then why'd you stay, right?
Yeah. And the other thing I was thinking about, because I see this, in terms of like the project that I'm making right now that we discussed a couple of weeks ago, you and I, people have a hard time conceptualizing non-empathy.
I know.
It's sort of like saying to somebody, imagine nothing. Like you can't. As a human being, you can't imagine. You can sort of vaguely imagine, but you're always going to put something in there. And I'm starting to feel that as I try and describe to people this construct of no empathy, they're trying to put something in there to save their world. Is what I'm saying make sense?
Yes. I kid you not. I kid you not. I explained this to somebody in a very similar way, because one of the things that, and this is a whole other topic, but in my insomnia, nights, my Google searches go down rabbit holes, right? And so one time I got on this thing of the concept of nothingness fascinates me. And if you really, I could talk about this for we could have a whole other thing on this, but this is the existential, it makes my head hurt, but just this concept of nothingness. So I started looking into it. 3 a.m. Google search, nothingness. Why is there something rather than nothing? Where is nothing? Like, what is it? Like, where are we? And what I could gather from hurting my brain was that we are very uncomfortable with the concept of nothing. We can't conceive, nothingness in terms of our own existence, nothingness in terms of the universe, all of it. And so this idea of this void, it's not even void, just a nothingness is even scarier than a void, because at least a void is an absence of something, and nothingness is just, it's not an absence of anything. It's just a nothingness. Right. And I think it's very hard for people to conceptualize it, because it's not something that we can, I just don't think it's something that we can understand. I genuinely have come to the idea that we're not meant to understand what nothingness is, because we can't. We don't experience it. And so I think that I don't even, I find, and I'm sure that you have kind of experience this as well and see this all the time with other people that you work with and that you speak to. One of the things that we like to do is like we especially people that have that kind of scientific mind, we like to gather as much data as humanly possible, right? So when people find out about NPD and when they realize this is what they're going for, one of the things that I find is they will do, like they are better researchers than the FBI. When they have
Yes.
that, right? I mean, and I can't blame them. They just look for so much information to understand what the hell just happened to them. And oh my God, there's a name for it, and there's symptoms, and there's this and there's that, to get a handle on it, because it's so uncomfortable to not have a handle on it. And one of the things I find with this is that people end up trying to get so much information about narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder when it happens to them, that they do it to the point of avoiding having to actually sit with the idea of how absolutely bizarre this is. And so I actually tell people when they get to a point, stop doing the research. Stop. You're not going to find any. There's literally nothing else out there. And now you're just doing it because it's so uncomfortable that there's nothing else that's going to make this feel better or to fill this void or whatever it is that you're looking for. And I think it's that what you're talking about, this idea that this lack of empathy, there's a nothingness. I think people are seeking out, trying to figure this out, and I don't think they ever will, because we don't experience it.
No, and I think I'm at the point now where I can do a pretty good job of imagining it the same way I can imagine if I'm writing a script, but I just don't have the equipment to truly imagine not caring about others' pain, because it's so automatic. I mean, I cry at whatever. I see a dog hurts and I wince. I see somebody, the mirror neurons will fire, and suddenly I'm feeling what I think they're feeling, and it's overwhelming. I can't switch it off.
No, and it doesn't even have to be like a caring emotion. I mean, it could be hatred. It could be confusion. It's literally no emotional response.
Yes.
So it's not even getting angry, and that's why the neutral responses are so important. Angry is a response. Rolling your eyes is a response, right? So it's like we still can't imagine no response, like, because we still have some sort of cognitive or emotional response to it.
Yeah. I'm so happy that I could have this conversation with a clinician, because this is not the average chat about existential crisis and isolation and aloneness. So I have a few questions from some people in the socials, but I want to ask you something first, because this is something that people often want to know. What are the steps? And this is a very broad question, so I understand. But what are the steps to heal emotionally and mentally from, narcissistic abuse? What do you recommend to people? Obviously, therapy is, very important.
Yeah. First, I tell them that this is going to take a long time, that it's essentially having to unwire you and rewire you. So it's going to take a long time, to be patient, have some grace, have some compassion for yourself, because you are going to have to, and that it's not their fault. I think that's like the first thing I tell people. I think, as you said, therapy is important. I do like to tell people that, as dark as it may seem now, and as confused and absolutely broken as you may feel, and as heavy as this is, there is so much change that can occur to get you into a better place. You are, because they now have figured it out, I say like more than 50% of this is already done. Getting you out of this, like the fish in the fishbowl, getting you out of the fishbowl and realizing like, oh, I was in a fishbowl. There's a whole world outside of this. That's the hardest and biggest kind of step for emotionally, even financially and physically, all of it. So once you're on the other side of it and you can look at it rather than being all tangled up in it, you're already on your way. So that key moment gives them a lot of empowerment. And so I also say this, which again, this is not clinical, but this is just what I like to tell people. You'll know you're healing, and this will happen when you can start to laugh at the absurdity and predictability of the crap they still try to pull on you. When you can look at it and say, really, like, this is what we're doing again, right? Like the text I got this morning from my friend, it was, like, she was laughing. This is so absurd, but so standard. And so eventually they'll get to that point. So I, tell people that there is light at the end of the tunnel. You will not always feel this way. You've already done such a significant amount of hard work for the simple fact that you're on the other side of this now.
You also said, it's not your fault. And I was thinking about, why do survivors blame themselves?
Oh gosh, because they're told from the very beginning it's all their fault. I mean, they are manipulated and gaslit into believing that everything that happens is a result of their behavior. We say this all the time in this area, that a narcissist will always attack your response, which is extremely appropriate, to their abuse, and view that response as the problem. Right? So you find out they're cheating on you with multiple women or multiple men, and you freak out. Guess what? That's when they're going to take their phone out and video you.
Yeah.
Right? Out of context. So you're trained to think that this whole thing is chaotic because of you. Because if it was really that bad, you would have left. And so you're just trained to think it is your fault. Something is wrong with you. Something is inherently wrong with you.
Yeah. And also I was thinking, as you're saying it, if I have empathy, you are led to believe you're causing them pain, and then you're searching for how you can improve yourself.
I mean, absolutely. Because think about it. I mean, if I know that I did something wrong, I'm gonna ask for forgiveness. And even if I don't think I'm wrong, I'm still gonna have the conversation of what went wrong so that I can figure out how to make things different, right? Or make things better. Yeah. Again, which is why I always put the parents and the kid thing in a different category, because it goes totally against the grain of how things should work. So, we want to make people happy. We want to make people comfortable. And so if we're told that it's our fault and we have empathy, exactly like you said, we're going to do what we need to do to make it better.
So this brings me to something I was just thinking. That's normal, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's sometimes called codependency. And I'm like, is it though?
So I think that's a good question. So where the codependency piece comes in is when that normal behavior that you just said is exploited. Right? Where you're kind of made to use it in situations that it's not necessary, and that you need to do it in order to feel like a good person. It's like it's your way of having to feel like a good person at the exclusion of other things.
Yes, that makes sense. I was just thinking, because I was trying to feel what it felt like. If I'm trying to make the other person happy and I don't matter at all, like it's almost like I have no self.
Yeah.
That sounds like codependency to me.
Exactly. It's like at the exclusion of everything else. It's that is what you're doing in order to feel like a good person. You have been conditioned to think that the only way you can be a good person is by catering to every demand this person has of you, or else you're a bad person. Because right. a healthy individual isn't going to want their partner to give up their sense of self in order to cater to them. I would never want that. Right.
That makes sense. Actually, it really helped me viscerally feel the difference now. For the first time, I get it, I think.
Yeah.
All right, I have some questions from some of the people online. This is from a buddy of mine. Why do narcissists deny reality when faced with evidence and facts that are undeniable?
Yeah. This is back to your question about misconceptions. Gaslighting isn't lying. And I think that that's an excellent I think that's why it's so confusing to people, because they're looking at it from the lens of lying. It's not lying. It's two totally different things. The function of what you're talking about is very different. So lying is you're trying to get out of something, or you're trying not to get caught. And so you make up a story. But usually with lying, when you're confronted with the evidence, you're like, oh, shit. All right. Yeah, I got caught. You may not apologize. You may still blame it on the other person, but you acknowledge that it happens because you're faced with evidence. what this question is saying is why are they? Because imagine being in a situation and I say to you, and I've been manipulating you for you can't do this to somebody the first time you meet them, right? This type of behavior, I mean, I guess you can, but it won't work. This type of behavior, the reason why it works is because they've already been so conditioned to not believe their own reality as it is and to depend on the narcissist to define their reality. So it's like, if you trust me, or if you have already put all your sense of self in my hands, and I'm telling you, no, this isn't me, this is AI, or no, your friend sent this to you. They're doing this on purpose because they're jealous of our relationship. And I have no confidence in my ability to perceive my world because I now depend on you to do that. I mean, the confusion's too much to bear. So I'm going to believe you because I don't doubt I doubt my ability to perceive it. So it's more about the fact that they're able to do it than it is their refusal to acknowledge that it's their reality. They know that's a picture of them. Of course they do. They were there. Of course they're not they know, well, they're delusional, but they're not psychotic. They know that's them. They know it. So it's more about, it's so batshit but it's because it's also, they're taking it out of context. This has been after a lot of manipulation and of purposely making you doubt your reality.
Yes. This is a really good question. I'm not going to name any names on these questions.
Okay.
This is so good. How do therapists escape the emotional toll of working with narcissists, or do they not?
We don't. I mean, listen, I have to somewhat, obviously, or else I won't be effective, right? I can't put my stuff in there. I can't let it interfere with my work. But I mean, I don't know about you, but if I'm talking about how my husband sexually assaults me every night and I have a therapist who's staring at me going, that must be difficult for you. No, I am there with them. I am experiencing that with them. They need validation. That is so unbelievably important because I don't even think, I know they don't even realize that they're being sexually abused. That's the worst part about it. So I think that, no, of course I don't escape it, but you learn as a clinician how to function alongside of it, let's say. Right? Like sometimes they intersect, but you have to make sure it's appropriate. But I mean, I'm human, and it would be absolutely bizarre to me if I didn't feel that. I wouldn't want a therapist that was kind of a, stone.
But does it feel like, I'm asking this so as a filmmaker, I'm dealing with victims a lot. And so it feels like a weight on me sometimes. Yes. And it feels like not a bad burden, but it's a burden of like, I'd like to see what I can do to help. That I carry with me.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. As you're saying it, I'm like, yes, I carry the weight of a lot of people's, lives. Yeah, I mean, I really do. And I mean, I put myself in that situation, but I look at it more as like, it's a real honor, honestly. And you probably feel this as a filmmaker. It's a real honor that people allow you into their world. So I look at it more as like, it's a burden, but it's like, it's an honor in a weird way, I guess. But it's heavy. It's very, very heavy, which is why sometimes, like even on social media, you'll see like I check out sometimes for a couple days, and sometimes I won't post anything, or I'll post something that has nothing to do with psychology, or I won't see people for a couple days. You need that because it's heavy. This is heavy. I mean, it's very heavy. It's very heavy.
It's very heavy. One last question. Yeah. I've actually got a few questions that are like this. Yeah. How to set boundaries when the person is an in-law and you still want to go to family events. And I was thinking, or you still need to deal with them, like a mother-in-law, a father-in-law. Like, how do you set boundaries? How do you deal with that kind of dynamic?
Yeah. So this is tricky because my initial response to that is your spouse whoever's parents they are, must be a unified front with you. If they are not, then that's a problem, and it's a problem with your relationship more so than it is with the in-laws. But let's assume that they see it and they're presenting as a unified front with you. You know, you have to set boundaries. I always say, don't set a boundary if you can't keep it 100% of the time. And people are like, what? I can't. That's why I tell you, start insultingly small with the boundaries. If you can't commit to something, because then you end up doing that kind of intermittent boundaries and it creates more chaos. So, you know, if they send you a text message and it's one of those novels of telling you, you know, I just want to see my grandchildren and everyone sees their grandchildren but me and they're not even going to know my name. And, you know, the whole guilt trip. You only respond to the one sentence in there that maybe is like a question of what time are you coming for dinner, right? And so you just, I'll be there at 6. So you have to set very strict boundaries with the text messaging, very strict boundaries with when they come over, right? Or, you know, they're not allowed to just show up at your house. And if they do, you don't let them in, right? Which is also why you need your spouse on board with you. But more importantly, boundaries, they're not going to adhere to your boundaries. So don't think that if they show up, it means your boundary didn't work. It's more about you setting your internal boundaries, right? Of what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not willing to tolerate, and then how you act on that.
God, you have to be a Jedi to figure all this stuff out.
I kid you not. Yes. Yes.
Is there anything like, because you've done a lot of podcasts, and you talk about this stuff a lot. Is there anything that you feel like you don't get to express, or you think that's super important that people really need to know?
No, I actually think it's honestly what I said before, that I never really get to say that the whole thing about, you know, clinicians shouldn't say this about certain diagnoses and things like that, and that everybody can change. I think I really never get to say what I said, that for me, for clinicians to actually say that it's very, very unlikely they're going to change. It's so hard for us to admit that. Like it took me a really long time and a lot of years working with people and a lot of experience to actually be able to say that. I know I thought it, but to actually say that out loud and make it real and true is really uncomfortable for me. Really uncomfortable, because trust me, I want to help them.
That's so interesting. You know, it's funny. I was thinking about how many, you know, clinicians I've spoken to over the years, and it has to be close to maybe 50. Only one has ever said to me they're convinced these people can change. The 49 said, fuck no.
And here's the thing. When you have these kind of two things, and when you have somebody who says, nope, I work with narcissists all the time, they're very capable of change, then you're seeing the people who have patterns that are similar to narcissistic abuse, where the function is inherently different and they have empathy, right? You just kind of have to dig through the crap to get to it. So that's the one thing. The other thing, I almost want to say, like, well, show me, give me a case study. I want to see, because if I'm doing something wrong and I can help them, oh my God, please show me, please. But I read the research, I follow what's out there, I see it myself. I've yet to see that. I wish listen, I hope I'm wrong. How's that? I hope I'm wrong. But I don't, I don't. And I hate saying it, but.
We're going to have a lot more conversations on this topic, you and I. Where's the best place for people to find you?
My website, drjamiezuckerman.com, and then Instagram, Dr. Z Psychologist. I post a ton of stuff about narcissism.
It's great stuff.
Thank you. My podcast is on wherever you get your podcasts. Next Up, Narcissism, which you were a guest on recently.
Yes.
And yeah, I have a bunch of experts on talking about all areas of narcissism, narcissistic abuse, and other mental health conditions. So
that is awesome. I loved this conversation.
Oh, me too. This was great.
Thank you. And to my audience, as always, stay curious.